So the topic that I'm covering today is domestic terrorism in the United States as we see it today. So I'm starting out with a quote here from one of the founding fathers of the U.S. that said this: "There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be the dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." So those were John Adams' words from over 200 years ago, but they still very much apply to the political climate we see today. In recent years, we've been divided politically as much as we have as a country in the entire existence of our country, and that has led to many of the issues we see today regarding humanitarian concerns as well as environmental, economic, etc., being split on not what is right or what is wrong, what is best for the country, what is worse for the country, but along political lines. I have one of my primary sources was a podcast, if any of you have heard of it, the Joe Rogan Show, where he had on Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from the state of Hawaii. On the show, she went to talk about how the first week that they were in Congress, the rookies all from both parties had their meetings, had their introductory events all together, no matter what party they were from. But after that first week, she said, quote unquote, they never interacted with each other again inside the confines of the political war room, so to speak, because their leaders of the parties told them, quote unquote, if it makes them look good, we don't want it. No matter what the bill is, no matter what the law was, any type of political discourse that came from the other party was to be thrown out and tarnished, if you could, by your own, for the sake of not making the other half look like they knew what they were doing. So, back to the topic at hand. Domestic terrorism, as described by Section 2331, Title 18 in the United States Codes, it means activities that A, involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of criminal laws of the United States of any state. B, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce the civilian population, to influence government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, kidnapping, etc. And C, primarily occur within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, which makes it domestic. So one of my main primary sources I'm going to be talking about today was the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2019. So it was originally sponsored by a Democrat, and of the co-sponsors, 21 were Democrat and 1 was an independent. The bill basically outlined a list of the primary terrorism concerns in our country today, with white supremacism and white supremacist terror attacks being number 1 on the list. For far and away in recent years, the most destructive and most harmful of any other categorical act of terror on the list. It also talked about how the government agencies and the politicians could work together in allocating time, funding, resources, etc., into fighting these heinous and extreme acts of violence. So here you can see a graphic from U.S. Extremist Crime Database. This is, I couldn't find one more recent than 2016, but from clearly September 12th, 2001 to December 31st, 2016, 47% of deaths resulted from far-right extremist attacks. The other 53% mainly were from radical Islamic extremists. And this is another graphic here showing that despite the discrepancy in actual loss of life, that the higher percentage of terrorist attacks were carried out by right-wing extremists at a clip of 74% to 26%. So another one of my primary sources that I looked over, the Domestic Terrorism Penalties Act of 2019, basically outlined the specific punishments for, the specific maximum and minimum punishments for a person charged and convicted of domestic terrorism of any kind, which included anywhere from kidnappings to counts of murder and anything in between that would fall under what the law states as domestic terrorism. So you can see here, the original sponsor was a Republican, and there were another 15 co-sponsors, where 14 were Republican, 1 was Democrat. And what we start to notice here is a trend of no matter who writes up the bill, no matter how good the bill is, because both of these were very seemingly bipartisan wants from both parties. They outline things that seem like a very straightforward for any politician who wants to take a step in the right direction. They outlined some ways to get that done, yet there was extreme partisanship on the co-sponsors of this bill again. Yeah, so after reading through both of these, I determined that they did not have any hidden clauses, undermining lobbyist messages, lobbyist demands, any funding going to a tricky part of any private industry, etc. And like I said before, I also determined that the concept of these bills is something any rational bipartisan congressperson who wants to put a stop to any and all domestic terrorism would vote to pass without a second thought. So, why have these bills not been put into law, or have not been even passed by the House or Congress? They haven't reached any stage past the original talking stage on the House floor. It's because politicians care much more about using these tragic events for political gain than signing in to change any actual laws or actual bills that will help prevent these atrocious acts. So I'm sure with the news coverage surrounding this one, specifically the El Paso shooting that happened earlier, I think it was August of 2019, where a gunman drove across Texas for 4 hours to target the city of El Paso, which is a largely Hispanic and Mexican-American area on the border between Texas and Mexico. He killed 22 people and injured another 24 using a high-powered assault rifle. And many of the news broadcasts right away after this event, CNN, ABC, Fox, everything, they brought on major politicians and presidential candidates and people of that sort, people of power, people of importance to our government, to talk about and voice their opinions about what exactly went on and who was to blame, etc., all these things. And in the transcript of the CNN broadcast from that night, I think it was that night or the next morning, presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke went on the show and was asked by the news anchor if he thought this was very, very a short time into his broadcast. He was asked if he thought the president was a white supremacist, and answered with a resounding yes, answered that it was entirely his fault. It was all of these things which a lot of people on the left agree with. But the fact that this was the first thing to come out of a presidential candidate's mouth after an atrocious crime like this, instead of looking to work together with his political adversaries and fix something like this, is an example of just how badly the divide politically affects our country, and how this hot button issue of these mass shootings and domestic terrorism as a whole is a large catalyst for what both sides see more of a roadblock to retaining their time in office rather than actually making change in the time they're there, regardless of